Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Ace on Music. I'm here joined by my producer Mark and my assistant Sean. This week we have part two of our interview with famed cover artist Ioannis, and check it out. I hope you enjoy it. You know, another
Yeah,
another one of the ones that I really like that you were involved with is one of the most iconic bands of the 70s and even of the 80s was Styx, and one of their seminal albums was, of course, the Paradise Theater album. And when they recorded what amounts to more or less a sequel to that record, Return to Paradise, you took this in the original album cover had this dilapidated theater that was kind of falling apart and obviously was in disrepair, and now you had the Return to Paradise and the theater just looking like as awesome as it would have in its heyday. How did that whole project come together, and where did that idea come from?
it was CMC Records. Tom Lipsky. I met him the year before at a convention. He told me about his record company he was launching. He knew I had done the Allman Brothers, and he approached me about working with him. So I had done a project up in the band Warren for him, and right after Warren, he came with me with five projects: Leonard Skinner, Styx, Dokken, Slaughter, I think, and so it was, can you do these things for me? Basically, I just signed these guys, and introduced me to Styx, which had the original lead singer back then,
Hmm.
and he told me what the that was, a Return to Paradise. So I was, it was just an obvious one. Speaking to the band, it's like, this is what we want to do, and I found this black and white photograph. I think it was a theater in New Jersey. It was like it was in a flea market. As a matter of fact, I go to flea markets or things like that, and I find like old postcards, and a lot of record covers that I've done have been inspired by some of these. As a matter of fact, Wake the Sleeper was a book my wife found of 1920s, 1930s of pictures of Buddhas, but from Thailand, which looked different. And that
Hmm.
gave me the idea how to do Wake the Sleeper. But with Styx, it was the same situation. And then it was just basically doing the Storm Thurgeson process, which is the way he worked back then, which is they shot black and white photographs and they hand colored them, right, with an airbrush and retouched them. That's what I was doing all through the 70s and the 80s when there was no Photoshop. I would we would shoot black and white photographs, like, I would do a project with Mick and we would shoot black and white photos, and I would hand color them and would give them that surreal look. That's how Houses of the Holy was done, right? Um,
Hmm.
so it looked like a cross between a painting and a photograph. You weren't really sure what you were looking at, but it had that look, and that's how we did the Styx thing. What got more involved was when I did their next album, Brave New World. But actually, that painting, that's an older painting for Brave New World. I had shown that to this gentleman, passed away, a really good friend, Jim Lewis, when he was the vice president at Polygram in 1985. And I had submitted that as for his band they had put together, Emerson, Lake and Powell, if you remember that.
I
And
do.
yeah, and
Three to
was
the
broken
power of
hearted.
three.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yep,
And then
great
they did
record.
three. Yep, yep. That was well. They couldn't get Carl, so they got Cozy, and
Better
the rest
choice,
is
I
history.
think. But anyway.
Yeah. Oh,
But
Powell is an incredible drummer. I mean, God bless them. They're just the two different styles. They're incredible drummers, both of them. Complete styles. I mean, if you come from a rock and roll background, then Cozy Powell's your man. You know.
absolutely. Well, this brings up an interesting point. You have been doing cover art for decades. And in today's day and age, cover art is a different affair than it was, say, 20, 30 years ago. What is your take on the current state of cover art? Like I'm in a position where record labels are constantly saying to me for my artists that as far as they're concerned, they would like a 1 inch square box that just has the name of the band in big bold letters because that's where most people are going to see it on Spotify or iTunes or whatever. I won't buckle to that because I love artwork on covers so much. But what's your feeling about where cover art is today?
I don't think Mick actually rock puts it the best. As long as rock stars are ugly, there's always going to be room for me and you to do our we make really bad looking people look good. And that's essentially that. Oh God, these comments go back, these arguments forever. And I just think, um, look, look at the explosion of vinyl right now. And it ain't because it's us old fogies who are being sentimental, is my daughter thinks it's so cool to look at this stuff because the younger generation perceives it as a merchandise item rather than as a sound delivery item, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and it's just, there's so many reasons why the record companies have crashed and burned. And being myopic is, if I'm saying that word correctly, is a major reason. I mean, people look back at the heydays of the 70s and the 80s and say, oh, look at the great art. You guys could do whatever you want. And everything was like, no, these guys had to fight it. I mean, record covers got done in the early 70s. Primarily, they were done in house, right? It took
Correct. Yeah.
artists to buckle the system and say, no, no, I'm not going to use the art director of Columbia. I'm going to use my friend, this guy that I know, and he's great. I mean, Storm, people say he was arrogant. He wasn't arrogant. Storm got used to just working for the artist, not for the record company. He never went and pitched his art to a record company. They would never allow him to do the things that he wanted to do, like not putting the name of the band on the cover. Are you kidding me? That was hierarchy.
Yeah.
When he showed Dark Side of the Moon, and the record label had a meltdown when they saw that. They're like, oh, this is nice art, and what are you going to put the title and the title of the album? It's like there isn't any. Like what? You're not going to put the name of the band on the album? Are you out of your mind?
I mean,
Uh,
and he did that not just with Dark Side of the Moon. He did it with, Wish You Were Here was another example of that.
Zeppelin, Zeppelin, the House of the Holy didn't have it had an oboe that you ripped out, but the actual packaging never had the name of the band on
Hell, Led
the.
Zeppelin 4 to this day, nobody can decide what that album's actually called. Is it Four Symbols? Is it Led Zeppelin 4?
Yeah, yeah. But getting back to your initial question, I had run-ins with creative directors and art directors even back at that age. One of these guys told me, "Look, as much ink and as effort and as strength goes into creating a record cover as a box of cornflakes. Okay, it's packaging. Get over it." Uh, and he said to me, "Look, the greatest record cover art is not going to hide musical garbage." That was his reasoning. And I said, yeah, let's. I can create a great record cover if the band stinks. I get it. And vice versa. I've seen uh, great albums, great bands who have mediocre art and they kind of made it. But, and here's why I differ in the opinion. If you combine both, right, that it really comes down, which is all they care about, the bottom line, it really brings home the how huge a band could be. And what I point to is take a band like Yes. If you take the name Yes, primarily it is a very silly name. But
Yeah.
when you say Yes, other than incredible music they write, the visuals, the world, the Roger Dean creator around them, it just changed their identity. Pink Floyd, if you take the name again, and I could go down the line, Pink Floyd, Iron Maiden. Now you can argue that Iron Maiden would have been, just as popular and it's huge because they wrote great music. But once it was combined with Derek Riggs, then it was just a whole other universe. I
Well, I
mean,
think that
Eddie.
I think cover art in general takes, like you said, the genius music and elevates it to an almost iconic status. Because when people start associating the imagery of a band with the music, it takes love of that music to a whole new level, in my opinion.
Yeah, and as far as just simply marketing is concerned, I kept running into the same problems. Like all of a sudden, the question I was getting in the '80s was, well, everything now is so small. It's 5 by 5 inches. It's a little CD idea. The days of record cover art are gone. Who cares anymore? It was like, well, you know something? I had a different opinion. Very few bands got gatefolds. Back then, you would just crank out a painting or an illustration, do some simple liner notes, and boom, project was taken care of. You know, but if you do but then in the '80s, you had an explosion. I mean, all of a sudden, designers had to think of 3D, not just the cover art. So the digipacks and the boxes and the pillboxes and just the singles with posters in them and patches. I mean, once creative is creative, it opened up a thing. All it is just your palette keeps changing. You still have to communicate, either be digitally or visually or whatever. The bottom line is you're selling a product. You take a band, okay, and then you figure out what to do to visually create an image for them, a style, whatever that may be, right? And however that image is conveyed, how it's going to look on the website, how the videos are going to look, how the graphics going to look. And right now, actually, visuals are even bigger, more important than in the '70s and '80s, because right now, let's be honest, it's about touring and merchandising, and you better have some damn good merch. That's how they're going to make money, and that's where I come into play. That's the thing. You're saying, what are you going to be doing? Well, you still need Mick Rock to do an incredible looking photograph, right? Because that's PR. That's their image. And you need visual artists to come out with great graphics. You go into Hot Topic, their biggest selling T-shirt is that white ghost, that logo that was for the Misfits. I bet you 90% of the people who buy that shirt have no idea that's the Misfits. Doesn't matter. That's a great image.
Yeah, that has haunted several of the bands that I've worked with over the years. I mean, Motorhead has that iconic
yeah,
pig
big,
skull thing that,
yeah,
I mean, and you see everybody wearing it. It's just everywhere. I mean, the Lips logo from Rolling Stones. I mean, everybody knows that one. But before we get to the end here, I know that you are familiar. You wrote this incredible book with Martin Poppoff about album cover art and all that, and I know that you know a lot of the other in your pantheon of great cover artists. And just to wrap things up here, I'd like to ask you about a few of the artists that I know that we are mutual fans of, and just to get your take on their work.
please.
Let's start with the recently deceased and much missed Richard Corbin.
Oh, look, if you grew up in the late '70s and you read Heavy Metal magazine and you were into comic books, Richard Corbin was a god. Uh, and of course, it was no surprise that Meatloaf, who was young, up and coming, he was a rock and roll guy, and it was the culture, and Corbin was just amazing. I mean, the way his take on bodybuilders, and of course, famously known for women with very huge breasts, which is what he loved to paint
Assets.
naked women. That was his specialty. But look at the cover, Bat Out of Hell. I mean, my God, that is
Bat out of hell.
incredible. And
Easily one of the most iconic covers of all time.
and I mean, underground comic books. You had the traditional comic book guys, Marvel and DC, but underground comics really literally exploded in the mid late '70s, and Richard Corbin was one of the reasons. He influenced people like Ralph Bakshi, who did the original Lord of the Rings as an animated film, and it definitely
Ralph, yeah.
influenced me. Oh my God, some of the things he would do. I mean, if you look at Richard Corbin, comic book, it was like works of art. I mean, the way he would do the psychedelic backgrounds, like the way he would mix oils and do all these weird patterns, and it was just
That's
incredible
why I think
artist.
that I think the 1980 heavy metal film really did a good job of capturing his style in that sequence they did on his Den character. I mean, like you
Oh
said, those
yeah,
psychedelic backgrounds and everything that they were doing. I mean, it really grabbed into it. Another set of artists who really were important to me, and I know that we've talked about them on our, personally before, are Greg and Tim Hildebrandt.
yeah. Those guys. What a great story. The closest I got to Greg Hildenbrand was Paul O'Neill. I knew him when he was a young manager, and I met him at Lieber and Krebs, and he went on to create the Trans-Siberian Orchestra and be the mastermind behind it. And he was always a fan of this kind of stuff. And the Hildenbrands, they grew up in the late 30s, and they wanted to work for Walt Disney. That was their dream. They loved doing those paintings, and they struggled for years. Nobody recognized him, and they all came together for him in 1976, 75, I believe. The Lord of the Rings had really caught on with the movement of the youth at the time. Actually, Uriah Heep, the song "Demons and Wizards," the whole album is, you know, a lot of it has to do with Lord of the Rings. Especially the
Yeah.
song "The Wizard." You know, um, so there was they had put out a calendar, Ballantine Books, I believe, put out a calendar. They had a bunch of different artists who they're taking Lord of the Rings, and it kind of sold well. And they thought, instead of having just a bunch of guys submitting stuff, and a lot of them was kind of cartoonish, some was good, some wasn't. Let's find a really good artist to do this. And they asked for submissions, and these two guys decided they lived in New Jersey, and from the way Ballantyne, the art director, recalls it, they she says he remembers that day. It was a rainy day, and it was the end of the day. He was getting ready to go home, and his secretary beeps him and says, "There's these two guys who have shown up, and they said they have artwork they want to show you. It's the Lord of the Rings." And Ballantyne's like, "You got to be kidding me, right? I got to get out of here." It's like, he goes like, "No, Ian." He goes, "No, just send him home. Tell him, no more submissions. I'm done." And he goes, "Ian, you really got to come outside and look at these guys. I mean, I haven't seen anything like them." And he walks out there and he finds these two identical twins, late 40s at the time, bearded, dressed in top hat and whatever, and they had these garbage bags. That was their portfolio. Because you from getting rained on, and they open up the garbage bags and they spill, and it's all these drawings, and they were incredible. But drawings, just charcoal drawings. And the guy says, he was just stunned. He's like, "My God!" He said he called it like, he had seen hundreds of portfolios. He hadn't seen anything like this, and he said to them, "Can you paint as good as you draw?" And he said, "Oh yeah, we definitely would. We definitely do." And he said, "Okay, can you do one for me?" And he goes, "Yeah." They came back like a week later, and they showed him the painting, and he was just blown away. He was like, it was Gandalf, I think. He was like unbelievable. He goes, "So how did you guys do this again?" And the way they work is they're identical twins. They would work. One of them's passed away, sadly.
Mhm.
Um, on canvas, they both work at it at the same time. One guy paints one side and one paints the other, or like one guy
Yeah,
will do the background.
I'd often been
Yeah,
told one starts in one corner, one starts in the other, and they kind of
yeah,
meet in the
yeah.
middle.
It's just incredible. So out comes the calendar, and it's just an explosion. They were so excited that they showed up the day that the calendars came in at Valentine's Press, and they all grabbed like about 200 of them each, and they ran downstairs on Fifth Avenue, and they were all dressed like 18th century garb, and they started singing Christmas carols, and they were passing the calendars around for free to anybody who was walking down the street. They thought it was the greatest thing that ever happened.
Well,
And,
those calendars, I tell you, when I was a kid, those calendars, my mother was a huge Tolkien fan, and she bought those calendars, and they were on my wall until I moved out from home. I mean, I had those pictures, the Hildebrands everywhere. And then, of course, the next year, they
they
got
just
tapped to do the Star Wars movie poster, right? But
nobody
going
wanted
on from
to.
there,
you want to laugh? Nobody wanted to deal with that. They thought it was going to be this stupid film that nobody cared about and everything. They got all excited about it, you know, and they did the first Star Wars poster, and it was like, boom. As a matter of fact, they were working on an animated film, right? Um, called Ursharak. They came up with a whole thing. They did a
I
presentation.
remember that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
the book
remember
and
that.
everything. And when they were told, everybody said it was the best, greatest presentation they ever saw, and everything. And they said, "Look, because back then technology, they said this movie's going to be way too expensive to make, so we can't make it." Which is one of the
Well, they
reasons Rings was made as an animated film for the same reasons. People said, "Oh,
yeah.
you're never going to be able to shoot this,"
I mean, and
you
they
know.
went on to do in the album, but pulling it back into music. I mean, the Sabbath covers they did and things like that. I mean, they were
Yeah,
incredible. But
Wolves and they did Star Castle, Citadel, the Marble. I know them all. I know I'm a fan. Again, if you're a comic book nerd, which is what I was, all these guys are your idols. Fantasy art, it's so really funny because just something that happened recently. Fantasy art and science fiction art was looked upon as, you know, pitifully by art collectors. And believe me, I respect Warhol and Basquiat and all those guys, right? Amazing guys, and I can understand a Jackson Pollock nowadays, or I mean, well, stuff like Salvador Dali. That's an obvious one, but fine art. But this art was looked upon as art that was, commercial, not real, not flaky, and that has all changed in the last 5 years. Um, Fantasy art, not in Europe as much, but definitely in the U.S. Europe had caught on to this a while ago. All of a sudden now, maybe because it's a difference in the generation, us perhaps that we are the older people now who control money and so on, has become the next thing to be collected. And with the alarm bells went off is what the prices it's fetching. Frank Frazetta, I don't know if you've ever seen a Frank Frazetta original. They're pretty
yeah,
small.
they are.
Yeah, they're
I mean, they
very
they go.
small.
One just sold at heritage auctions for in the six figures. So I mean, they go for a
Yeah,
lot of money.
5.3 million
Yeah.
for
So
one of his paintings. And
well,
it ain't one of
I
his
want.
paintings.
I was just going to say I want to thank you, Ioannis, for joining us on the show today. I really appreciate your time. Um, I hope that you'll come back again and talk to us some more because I know that there's just a ton more things
Anytime
that
you
we
want,
got
man.
to talk about.
Anytime you want. I love talking to you. The thing is, I think we go crazy because we're both, sci-fi
We're
fantasy
both
nerds.
music nuts.
Yeah, we can,
All right.
we can our own universe. Yeah.
All right. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the episode. Your support is always appreciated. You can always write to us at acetalksmusic@gmail.com with feedback on the shows or ideas for other topics you'd like us to talk about. And I want to thank Mark and Sean for joining me here today, and especially Ioannis for his time. And I hope that you come check us out over on the patreon.com platform where we air our after hours show. And in the meantime, we'll see you next time, and please stay safe.